Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
This story is about a girl, and it begins with her walking down the street and reading a very interesting story. And in this novel, a girl named Melissa imprisoned a very handsome and attractive guy in her estate. This guy was all bloody and had various abrasions. He started cursing the girl. However, she came closer to him and only smiled. After that, Melissa said that he was repeating this phrase over and over again. However, she was still alive and well. After that, the girl turned to her assistant, who was wearing a chain around his neck, and told him to open the cage. The man bowed and said that everything would be done, and immediately did so. Then Melissa entered the area where the guy was hung. He immediately started shouting loudly and told her not to dare to come near him, but the girl just smiled and said that she definitely wouldn't do that. And then she asked how she should improve her relationship with him then. Melissa was sly and said that, after all, he was her husband, and they should have a good relationship with each other. The man was incredibly angry at that moment. He lowered his head down and said that she had forcibly imprisoned him in this place, and he never recognized this marriage. But the girl came closer to him, ran her finger over the man's bare chest, and said that she was hurting her with such terrible words. She also asked him to understand that what was done could not be undone, and that he simply needed to accept the situation as it was. This guy started screaming even louder. He asked her to let him go because she drugged him and made him do all this. Melissa was actually enjoying this reaction and asked him to say out loud what she made him do. But the guy didn't want to answer her question, and only sighing heavily, he said that she was shameless. For a while, the girl was simply silent. After that, she threw her arms around his neck and said that she had come that day with good news, and also added that his fiancé had found the entrance to the witch's forest. The girl also said that she would attack her on that day in order to rescue her beloved. With a bloodthirsty smile on her face, Melissa said that she hadn't killed anyone in so long, so she asked how he felt about her bringing him her head. Of course, the man didn't like this prospect at all. He started yelling at the girl and told her not to even think about touching her. But to Melissa, it was just a game, and running her pen over his chest, she said it wasn't a survey at all. This guy's name was Bass, and she pulled him as close to her as she could, telling him to kiss her. But the guy, turning away, said that she'd just made him sick. However, Melissa, of course, ignored his desire and simply went ahead and kissed the man on the lips herself. Then suddenly, the girl who was reading this story noticed that she had very little battery left on her phone. This made the girl very angry. She could not believe that the end happened at the most interesting place. And she was very interested in how the main character would come to save her fiancé. In fact, this story was called Don't Make the Princess Angry, and was in the genre of romance and fantasy. According to the plot, the young Prince Bas goes to an enemy country to ask for the hand of the princess in order to put an end to the 100 Years' War. However, on the way, he was kidnapped by the dissolute witch Melissa and forced to become her husband. In order to save her fiancé, the main character invaded this witch with an army. However, it was too late, as Melissa had tortured Bas to such an extent that he died, leaving only a corpse behind. Wanting to avenge her fiancé, the main character, with the help of the main character, sets out on a journey to kill Melissa and destroy all the witches. Because the girl who was reading this story was too engrossed, she didn't even notice that the traffic light turned red and started crossing the road. However, turning her head to the side, she saw a car flying at her at great speed. At that moment, the girl thought that she would surely die, because this accident had to be serious. Her phone immediately fell to the ground, and the girl lost consciousness. But soon she began to hear some strange voices that said that it was the witch's magic, and they were trapped. The other warriors who were around her said that it was urgent to protect His Highness Prince Bas. When the girl heard this name, she immediately realized that this was the groom of the main character from the novel Don't Make the Princess Angry. And these cries were very similar to the words of the soldiers when Melissa kidnapped the prince. At that moment, The girl suddenly felt a strong pain in her chest and realized that it was because her heart was beating too fast. She started looking at her body and remembered that she had been hit by a car, but somehow she was alive. After this, the girl began to look around, trying to understand where she was. But she didn't even have time to take a good look at anything, because a male voice addressed her and asked if she really wanted him to become her husband. The girl quickly turned around to see who had said that, and then she saw a guy in front of her. Having carefully examined his appearance, she was very surprised and could not understand where such a handsome boy came from in her world. But the more the girl looked at him, the faster she realized that this face was very familiar to her. At that very second she realized that this was Baz in his youth, the same man who in history was tortured to death by the evil witch Melissa. Then she wondered who she was anyway. But at that moment, Baz turned to her, calling her Melissa, and asked if she had even heard what he had asked. When he saw her surprised expression, he immediately repeated his question, and Melissa could not believe that she really was the main villain. The girl was in despair. She could not believe that fate had really mocked her so much. She believed that this was really the end, because she had been transported into a book and had even kidnapped the main character's fiancé. Melissa believed that she was now really going to die, but Baz, seeing her behavior, became wary. He did not understand why her behavior had suddenly changed so much. In fact, the man also retained the memory of what had happened before, and he was surprised by the girl's behavior, all because the witch had previously been very confident in her abilities and powers. She said that he would only be her husband and that no one would dare to disturb them. In fact, Baz didn't even expect that he would be resurrected and would find himself at the very moment when the witch was supposed to kidnap him. At that very moment, Melissa was trying to stay calm and not panic. She just needed to apologize and let him go, and then she decided that she would be saved. So, smiling tenderly, the girl turned to him and called him Prince, telling him to listen to her carefully. The girl understood perfectly well that if she valued her life, she had to stay away from the main character's fiancé. Otherwise, the cutie Melissa would suffer a very terrible fate. But at that moment, Baz suddenly spoke to her and said that she absolutely did not need to say anything because he agreed to become her husband. Of course, the guy had his own plan for this. He was going to make her life worse than death this time. In fact, this story, in which the girl found herself, unfolds in a huge world filled with magic, which can be divided into 3 areas. These regions were the Eastern, that is the Solonian Empire, the Central, where the Witch Forest was located, and the Western, in which was the Cadrian Empire. And on the border between the 2 empires, the fire of war had been raging for 100 years, and the people were in a very difficult situation. And as the forces of the 2 states waned, the power of the witches only grew. Finally, the 2 empires decided to put aside old grievances and unite in the fight against a common enemy, stopping the war through marriage. In fact, no one, of course, could have imagined that the depraved witch Melissa could kidnap His Highness Prince Baz. At that moment, he was heading to the Solonian Empire to meet his dear bride, and at that moment in the body of this very depraved witch, there was just the girl who loved this story very much. She understood that in the near future, 2 huge empires would declare her wanted, and the main characters would get her out of nowhere to kill her, taking revenge. So Melissa was just in a panic. She understood that under no circumstances should she allow this to happen. The boy, smiling, asked if she could free him and the soldiers. He would go with her, so there was absolutely no need to trust them. Melissa immediately raised her hands up and told him not to worry because she wouldn't lay a finger on them. The girl also said in a frightened voice that she would let him go too, and also hoped that such a noble man would be lenient to the mistakes of ordinary people and would not take what happened seriously. She herself really hoped that in this way she would be able to change the plot so that what happened in the original story would not happen. Baz looked at her in surprise and could not understand what kind of game this woman had decided to play. She's behaving strangely, in his opinion, because before she stopped at nothing, she did many mean and shameless things to get his body and soul. He looked at her with disgust and thought only that this woman had a very deceitful family, which should not be trusted under any circumstances. Melissa was very worried at that moment. She did not understand why he was silent, and even assumed that he decided to get even with her. The girl was very irritated by the situation she had found herself in, and she did not understand why she had not been transferred into the body of the main character. She would have done a very good job in that role, and Melissa was simply furious that she was transplanted into the body of the main villain of this story. But at that moment, Bass, suddenly smiling maliciously, asked her why she was suddenly driving him away. The guy made a very pitiful expression on his face and asked if she didn't like him anymore, and also asked if she hadn't loved him so much before that she stole him from under the altar. He couldn't believe that she had planned this for so long, and now she just wanted to let him go. That's why Bass told her not to leave him, because he doesn't want a marriage of convenience, but wants to be close to his sister Melissa. When the girl heard this, she couldn't believe that he was really that cute. She thought that this guy was incredibly good in his youth. According to the original story, after Melissa tainted his purity, Bass became a very dark and cruel person. He suffered from Stockholm Syndrome for a long time, hated Melissa fiercely, but freed himself a little from the vice until he finally died at her hand. Melissa thought it was all a big nightmare. She couldn't believe that because she had been reading that story non-stop, she had now become a devil herself. Bass turned to the girl again and said that he was in great pain, so he asked if she could free him from the shackles. At that moment, the girl looked at his incredibly cute expression and thought that because of such an appearance, her thoughts were not pure and she had become a sinner. However, he called her sister, so she did not know how to restrain herself, and coming closer to the man, said that of course she would untie everything now. Melissa also asked him for forgiveness for this. She explained that she was busy with her woman and forgot to let him go because of this. When Melissa came closer to him, the guy immediately smiled and said that she was very good, and also that he was grateful to her for freeing him. In reality, the guy thought that she was just a lustful idiot, and as soon as she loosened her bonds, he would immediately kill her. However, at that moment, Melissa, before finally untying his hands, realized that if she freed him like that, he might come back and take revenge on her. Bass continued to smile and asked his sister why she had suddenly stopped, and he himself thought that most likely his pretense had not deceived her. But the girl, moving away from the tree, said that, unfortunately, she could not let him go yet, and also asked for forgiveness for this. Of course, she knew she was being completely careless, because in history, Bass had always been a very smart character. So the girl guessed that most likely at that moment he was pretending to be submissive and compliant, and as soon as she let him go, he would immediately want to settle scores with her. She was very happy that she read this story and knew that Melissa had a backup plan to stop Bass from killing her. Therefore, the girl, looking him straight in the eyes, said that although she sincerely wanted to free him, she was also worried that conflicts might arise between them again. So she asked him if he would mind if she cast a spell on him. When the guy heard this, he was very surprised and could not believe that she would actually do this. But without thinking twice, Melissa moved closer to him and began kissing him on the lips. The guy immediately blushed, his cheeks from this, and he thought that she was very shameless and did not understand what she was allowing herself to do. But Bass also understood that with her actions she was branding him, just like in her past life. At that moment, a very interesting sign appeared on his neck. It was called the Seal of the Heart. It was a terrible kingdom, and the one who was sealed lives with the spell for one life, feeling all its wounds. However, the injuries that are inflicted on the person with the seal do not reflect on the caster in any way. In her past life, she used this curse when he bit her. So now the guy was ready to enter into marriage on his own. But for some reason, she still wanted to put this mark on him. He was simply furious at the actions of this woman and thought only that this time he would definitely tear her to pieces. Soon after the kiss ended, Melissa blushed all over. She couldn't believe that it was really her first kiss and with her favorite character. But immediately after that, she removed the magic that was holding the guy back and smiling, said that now he could definitely be free. He looked at her in surprise and couldn't believe that she really seriously thought that he would just up and leave. In order to remove the spell of the heart seal, the caster's true love was necessary. However, he believed that a heartless woman like Melissa was incapable of such feelings at all. He understood that in his situation it didn't really matter, because in any worst-case scenario, they would just die together. Baz immediately made an innocent expression on his face and, turning to Melissa, said that it was his first kiss, so now she was responsible for it. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised and indignant. She just wanted to let him go. And then he decided to force himself on her as a husband. The girl thought it was very mean of him to act like that and was angry with him. But at that moment, he knelt down in front of her and, taking her hands, asked if she would be against it. He said that, of course, he understands that she has many men, and they are probably much better than him and know how to please her. When Melissa heard this, she immediately objected and said that it was all untrue because she didn't have anyone like that. She thought about how she had been single for 24 years and had never even kissed anyone before that day, so she didn't understand how he could suggest that. But then suddenly, Bass ran up to her and, hugging her, asked if this really meant that she agreed to marry him. The girl looked at him in surprise, but suddenly he took her hand and kissed it, saying that he would definitely become a good and faithful husband to her. But of course he had nothing good in mind. He was going to take revenge on her in the most terrible way possible, so she had nothing good to prepare for. Soon after the incident, the girl and the guy returned to the witches' forest, where there were several sorceresses. When the witches saw Melissa from afar, they were very surprised, because they did not understand who this boy was next to her. Some witches couldn't believe that she had actually kidnapped the prince of the Cadrian Empire and thought that her appetite was only growing. Then suddenly, Bass, holding her hand, turned to her and with a smile on his face said that everyone was only talking about her, and also added with admiration that she was very popular. Melissa thought the opposite. She didn't think it was so good to have that kind of fame. Absolutely the entire witch forest knew that Melissa was obsessed with men, young and old, everyone without exception. And besides, she was now next to the prince, who pretended to be head over heels in love with her. Before they set off for the witch's forest, Bass, taking her hand, told the warriors to return and report to their father that he had found his love and that he was not going to marry for convenience. He also asked them to convey that his father dealt with these political matters himself and that he would never set foot there again. Of course, now the girl doubted that this was even the story she had read, because according to the original plot, Bass hated Melissa with all his heart. So now the girl did not understand at all why he stuck to her like a bath leaf. But in any case, before the main character gets him back, Melissa is obliged to take good care of him in order to avoid the original ending. In fact, when the guy entered the witch's forest, he was a little lost. And all because this forest is located on the border of two empires and for many centuries was shrouded in many secrets and magic. Many people said that the sun god was born in that place and that countless treasures were hidden under that forest. Wanting to take possession of the treasures, people declared all witches to be a dark force that must be destroyed in order to preserve the purity of the sun god. But once the guy got to this place, he was very surprised at how it actually looked. He could calmly look at everything and study the appearance of people because last time Melissa dragged him along these streets like a dog. Because of this, people discussed everything in much the same way as they had that day. But he could not see anything. And after he opened his eyes again, he found himself locked in the same cage from which he did not emerge until his death. He thought that he absolutely had to take revenge on Melissa, because such behavior was completely unacceptable. But then suddenly his thoughts about the future were interrupted by someone's voice behind him. This voice belonged to one witch, who was flying on a broom and was already approaching the guy, who was not even going to move away, because he simply did not notice her. Luckily for him, Melissa managed to grab his hand in time and pulled him towards her, thereby removing that little witch from the way. She immediately told him that he needed to be careful, But the man at that moment turned completely red. He felt very awkward and did not understand what was happening at all. When the witch finally landed, other witches surrounded her and began to scold her, saying that careless flights are the tears of family and friends. The girl immediately apologized to them and said that she had only recently received her flight license, so she had not yet had a chance to practice fully. Bass stood there in amazement at that moment, looking at the girl. He simply couldn't believe that Melissa had actually just saved him, and she, in turn, looked him straight in the eyes and asked if everything was okay, because the girl understood that if he suffered even a little, the main character would definitely kill her. But then suddenly the guy began to think about who she was, because the previous selfish, and evil woman certainly could not protect him. That is why Bass really wanted to know what kind of person was in front of him at that moment. But when he looked at her shy expression, he thought that it was very familiar to him. And the guy didn't understand why after his rebirth she became so shy and completely different. After that, he wondered who else, besides Melissa, could look at him with such terrible shamelessness. However, at that moment, the girl, making a surprised expression on her face, asked if he was asking her about anything. But the man, smiling, said that he had not asked anything like that, but simply wanted to walk home holding hands with her. After that, he kissed her hand like a true gentleman and said that he would like to go to their new house. As soon as he did this, Melissa found herself in the wrong place. She was incredibly pleased with the way he showed his attention, and the girl wondered what this guy was doing at all, as well as how he could seduce her like this. Some time passed from that moment, and they finally came to the edge of the witch's forest. Melissa immediately went to the front doors and began to open them. She said that while he was visiting the witch's forest, he was completely safe and could leave at any time. It was very important for the girl to show that he was not a hostage at all, but that he had chosen this fate himself. She also smiled and asked that if he heard bad rumors about her, he simply did not believe them. Melissa especially warned him not to listen to all the gossip about her being dissolute and having promiscuous relationships with men and even women. After the girl opened the front door, she began to let him in and said that she was not that kind of person at all. So she asked him to pass by and not linger on the street for long. Of course, Melissa was going to completely change the plot of this story and really hoped that when the main character came, she would even thank the girl for how well she took care of the prince. Before entering, the girl also told him not to be shy, because she has a very big house and he is the first man she has invited to her place. However, at that moment, a lot of men suddenly came out to them, one of whom was a guy with a chain around his neck. And he, seeing Melissa, immediately rejoiced, calling her the mistress. After this, the girl turned her head in the other direction and saw many more different men who, delighted, said that they were glad to see her back. When the girl saw all these guys, she was very surprised. She could not believe that her character was really so slutty. Without thinking twice, Melissa immediately closed the door behind them and decided to somehow get out of this situation in front of the prince. The girl, smiling, turned to the guy and said that she had prepared this greeting especially for his arrival and also asked if he liked it. Bas felt very uncomfortable, but said that he liked it, and he himself could not believe that this woman could have so many men besides him. The girl began to move away from the door and, laughing, said that since he liked it, she would pay the artists and send them home so that they would not bother them anymore. As soon as the girl entered the house, she immediately began to shout loudly at them and swear, and also tried to somehow solve this problem. Bas stood on the street and couldn't believe that Melissa was saying that she loved only him. He thought that she really was a real liar, but this didn't put him off, because he was gradually going to get even with her for everything. Soon Melissa went to her office and gathered all these men. She said that she did not care at all how they got to this place. However, from this day on they will all be free and should never appear in her estate again. She knew that if she really wanted to survive, the first thing she had to do was to shed the label of a slut. She couldn't let Basu and the others see her that way. But then suddenly one of the guys said in a loud voice that he would never leave his mistress. The man looked at her with a pitiful look and asked if the mistress had a new lover and she no longer needed them. Then suddenly, another man spoke up, saying that he too was not going to go anywhere. He added that it would be better to kill him, but under no circumstances to drive him away. When Melissa saw their faces, she was very upset. She could not believe that they really served her so faithfully. Of course, she remembered something about these characters. At first glance, they were simply Melissa's lovers, whom she had kidnapped. But in reality, they were something like round-the-clock housekeepers who served a domestic invalid. The dark one was called Seth. He was only 18 years old. Melissa pulled him out of captivity half dead, and he is forever grateful to her for saving her. She replaces the whole world for him, and he is her #1 fan. The pale-faced boy with the pleasant voice was called Seren, and he was only 19 years old. He was originally a singer in the church choir until cruel nobles took him away. He suffered many humiliations until Melissa, after hearing him sing, kidnapped him. Even though the girl's the main villain in the story, in the eyes of these two she was a real savior and even a goddess. That's why the guys reacted like that when she said she wanted them to leave. Seth hugged her leg and said that he didn't want to leave his mistress because he couldn't survive without her. Because of this, the girl didn't even know what to do now because she didn't want to leave them alone in trouble. Soon after, she met Bass and told him that while he was still getting used to it, she had hired 2 escorts for him to help him if necessary. She pointed towards one guy, saying his name was Seth. The man immediately turned to him and said that he heard that he was a prince of some country, and then added in a rude voice that all of them nobles were idiots. But at that moment, Seren came up to him and, shutting the guy's mouth, said that he and Seth would take turns guarding the man, awaiting orders. Melissa smiled and said that they were both familiar with the rules of this estate, so if he needed anything, he could just ask them. She actually considered herself a genius. Since she had sent these walking troubles to look after Bass, then the 3 troubles were gathered together and became easier to avoid. But Bass, when he saw that the girl immediately introduced people to him in order to follow him, was not even surprised, because he knew that she was another empty talker. But of course he didn't tell her that, but just hugged her and thanked her, saying that she was very caring and that he was very pleased. Smiling, he said that he couldn't even imagine a better wife. That same night, when Melissa went to bed, she had a nightmare that the princess came from behind her and said that she had killed Basu. The girl immediately said that it was not her and that she had never killed anyone. But the princess did not care at all. She was already ready to take revenge. Before she was killed in her sleep, the girl woke up in horror, but after looking around her area, she realized that it was just a dream. So she calmed down a little. For a second, it even seemed to her that Melissa had actually been killed, which is why she just lay on the bed for a while, trying to accept the whole situation. At that moment, she was about to get out of bed, but suddenly someone grabbed her hand and put her back. This person called her his sister and told her not to be afraid. Melissa was very surprised. She did not immediately understand who it was, but when she saw Basu's face, he said that it was him and she should not be afraid. He continued to lie there, hugging the girl, and she asked in a trembling voice what he was doing in her bedroom in the middle of the night. This really surprised her, because she had given him a separate room and had placed the wound on the outside so that everything would be in order. So she didn't understand how he got into her room at all, having escaped from those 2. But of course, everything was obvious. His loyal guards simply fell asleep, and he calmly left. Bass at this point made a very sad expression on his face and said that in fact he really didn't want to sleep alone because he was afraid of the dark. The girl ran her hand over his face and asked if Serena and Seth were with him. She believed that if he was really afraid of the dark, he should look for those 2 healthy men, and she was certainly no help to him in these matters. But Bass was ready to even burst into tears and said in a very quiet voice that he didn't need them, he only needed the girl. Melissa could hardly contain herself at this point. She thought it was illegal to make such advances with such a straight face. She was not young, and her heart might not take it. The guy started hugging her tighter and asked her to let him stay because he really wanted to sleep next to her. Melissa immediately pushed him away from her and said that, of course, this cannot be done. After that, She sat down on the bed and said that she would not sleep with him even for his own good, and she thought that she would definitely not avoid trouble if she could not stand it and simply did not eat him. Of course, he shouldn't overestimate the chastity of a lonely girl, so she tried with all her might to drive him out of her room. Melissa explained that there are certain differences between a man and a woman, so it is better for him to go back to his room and sleep peacefully there. When the guy heard this, he was very surprised and said in a sad voice that they were husband and wife, and he thought it was quite normal for them to sleep together. She thought that of course this was not normal, because she did not force him to become her husband, and it was he who was actually stalking her. So in this situation, she was the victim, not him. She also thought that the whole situation was very strange, because in history the plot was not like that at all. And Melissa suggested that perhaps when she was reborn in this world, a butterfly effect was created. In fact, in the novel, Bas's death gave the heroine the determination to take revenge, and in carrying out her revenge, the princess was assisted by the protagonist, whom she eventually fell in love with. However, now that Bas was alive, she didn't know what the heroine needed to take revenge for and how she could even meet the main character. Bas was very surprised because in her past life, Melissa did not let any men into her bedroom, including even him. But now he did not understand what had changed. He couldn't believe that she had really kidnapped him because she liked him, or that there was something more behind it. He knew that in order to get closer to her, he would have to bribe her somehow. So, pushing her back onto the bed, he asked her to let him stay in this place, and he would do everything so that she would not regret it. Bas believed that she would never reject a man who came to her door. But Melissa could not understand what to do, because she certainly did not want all this. The girl hugged him back and said that she agreed to let him stay with her, but she had one condition. Bas, smiling, immediately asked what this condition was, also pulling her lips closer. He said that whatever her desire was, he would be able to fulfill it. Of course, he was very happy that she had finally shown her true face. And although he was ready to sacrifice his body, he did not expect that he would have to do it so soon. Then the girl turned him over onto his back and, being on top, said that her condition would be as follows. A month later, he and she will take the entrance exams to the Belid Military Academy. When the guy heard this condition, he was very surprised that he wouldn't even have to take off his clothes. Melissa, running her hand over his face, asked if he agreed to this condition. The guy was very surprised, but of course he agreed, because he expected the worst. When the girl heard this, she immediately laid him down next to her and covered him with a blanket. She thought that before Melissa defiled him, he was a very good boy and obedient. After that, she turned over onto her other side, lying next to him, and said that in that case, they should go to bed already. Bas was very worried at this moment and wasn't even sure if he was dreaming all this. He couldn't understand why Melissa just stopped. But he also suggested that perhaps she had tasted so many pleasures that her health had even deteriorated, and therefore she did not want anything else. He was also surprised why she suddenly needed to join the Belid Academy. In fact, while he was imprisoned in his past life, he was cut off from the world and had no idea what was going on outside his cage. The last time Bas heard about Belid Academy was from Melissa, when she said that his fiancé had fallen in love with some guy from that very academy. How he wished then that the girl would simply torture his flesh instead of gradually corroding his soul with such methods. Bas was silent for a while, and then he asked her why she wanted to join this academy so much. The girl, without opening her eyes, said that he would find out about it in time. But in fact, she knew that in that world, other than the witch's forest, only the Belid Military Academy on Nathan Island was not under the control of any country. She also provided Melissa with shelter for a time while she was on the run. But most importantly, the main character, Edwin Forster, was there at the time. That is why the girl believed that she had to find him before he met the main character. A whole month passed from that moment, and Melissa and her boyfriend finally went to this academy. They were sailing on a ship, and when the girl saw an island on the horizon, she asked with delight, "Is this really it?" None of the guys answered her because they were seasick and felt very bad. But the girl didn't care, and she told them to go quickly and have a look. But when she saw the terrible expression on Bass's face, she began to worry very much. She came closer to him and asked if everything was okay with him at all. Of course, the girl understood that these three were sick all the way, but she did not expect that everyone would be so susceptible to seasickness. Bass, when he heard her question, became very angry. He could not believe that his condition could make it seem like he was okay. He believed that this woman had deliberately dragged him so far on this terrible vessel in order to make fun of his appearance, for that was in her nature. But in the end, Bass said he was fine. Then Sid, who was feeling the worst of all, turned to her and asked how much longer they had to sail. And his other assistant asked the girl if she was in any pain, because all three of them were feeling bad. But she looked very good. Melissa smiled and said that she was fine. She really liked this cool sea breeze, so she was really enjoying being on this ship. Of course, Seth didn't expect anything else from his mistress, because she was so strong, and even the pitching and wind didn't change her face. After that, he turned his gaze to Bass, who looked very terrible, and the guy could not understand what she even saw in such a weakling. But then suddenly the ship began to stop, and the people who were on it began to be indignant, not understanding why they were making a stop, because the Belite Academy was still far away. When Melissa heard all these screams, she immediately turned her head to the side to understand what was going on. Then the girl saw a man who looked like the captain. He came out to the passengers to explain something to them. When everyone finally fell silent, he told the people that he was sorry, but the waters ahead were under the control of the Belite Military Academy, and the ship could not move any further. When people heard this, they started to get very indignant. They couldn't believe that this was really happening, because they had to take entrance exams tomorrow, and being late was unacceptable. Others could not believe that they would have to swim the rest of the way. They considered it completely impossible. Then the captain, after listening to them, said that he was really very sorry, but students who wished to pass the entrance exams to the academy always relied on their own abilities. After that, some of the guys jumped into the water, and one of them said that if they couldn't even handle this test, then he didn't understand how they planned to pass the certification at all. Melissa was just standing on the ship at that moment, watching all of this. Then Bass turned to her in a worried voice and said that he couldn't swim, so he couldn't get to the academy that way. And he himself, of course, wanted to see how the girl would get out of this situation and what she would do with three people who couldn't swim. But then Melissa suddenly put her hand on his head to calm him down and told him that he didn't have to worry. The girl said with a smile on her face that as long as she was nearby, he could just lie there and not move. Of course, she knew that getting into the military academy would not be so easy, and fortunately she had prepared for such a complication in advance. She took out one board and told the boy to watch and learn how to do it. Melissa smiled at Bass and said that he would just have to ride the wave and then everything would be fine. But the guy, seeing this board, immediately began to worry and asked in a frightened voice what it was. In fact, he really hoped that she didn't expect to actually reach the shore on this piece of wood. But then Seth suddenly raised his hand and said that he had guessed. The guy said he thought they would all lie down on the board and hope the current and wind would carry them to shore, but his partner said it was low tide at the time, so they definitely wouldn't be able to get there that way. When he heard this, he immediately thought of this outcome and told the guy that he was indeed right. After that, he turned to Melissa and asked what they should do then. The girl smiled and told Seth that he was very clever, but they would never arrive on time that way, so she had a much better way. Bass, smiling, asked his sister if she was really going to use magic. He understood that if she really did this, she would immediately reveal that she was a witch. Although the academy trains excellent officers for all corners of the world, its charter states that a witch is not allowed to enter without permission. He was very tense, because he did not understand why she wanted to infiltrate this academy so much and what her true intentions were. But after putting the board on the water, Melissa said that they should enjoy the show and not worry. After that, she jumped into the water after the board. Of course, she knew that all surfers conquer parallel worlds, and she was going to become just that. Then suddenly, the people who were on the ship saw this and immediately began to watch how the girl made various maneuvers on the waves with the help of her surfboard. The passengers were shocked. They couldn't believe that she could glide so well over the waves, and even thought that it was some kind of witchcraft. People were amazed at how well she could do all of this, but Melissa asked Bass on the next turn if he had seen how well she handled the board, even without magic. She also smiled and said that she would go and borrow a boat on the island and then come back for them, and then everything would be very good. Seth immediately became very happy and beamed with happiness. He turned to the other passengers and said that this was his mistress, so they should be proud that she was traveling with them at all. When Bass heard all the words the boys said, he got a little angry. He thought they were stupid, loyal dogs, and all they could do was praise, although they had a very ugly appearance. But Melissa then went towards the shore and told her dear friends to wait for her return. Bass thought that it wasn't so bad that she didn't reveal her identity right away. He was going to see how she was going to pass the Academy's assessment without revealing her abilities. At this very time, a meeting of all the students was taking place at the Billet Military Academy. The girl in military uniform, who was their teacher, said that the annual entrance exams to their academy would take place tomorrow. She also added that the students whose names she would name would help the teachers evaluate the candidates. They would pretend to be examinees and check the integrity and talents of the new students from within. The girl explained that their assessment would be included in each candidate's overall score, which would have a major impact on their future. After that, she was going to announce the names of those who would be doing this. She named some people and then said the name of Edwin Foster. The guy at that moment was sitting at the back of the class with a textbook on his face and sleeping. When the girl saw that he was not reacting to her words at all, she ran up to him and, hitting the desk, began to scream loudly, telling Edwin that it was already daytime and he should not sleep. The guy woke up at that very moment, scratched his ear, and said that it was too loud. After this, Edwin looked at his teacher and said that it was not necessary to shout so loudly because he was not deaf and could hear everything. In fact, he was really tired of all this because in the past he somehow became the best graduate of this damned academy. And now he was forced to go to the same lectures again. But what Edwin didn't like most was when he was forced to participate in various extracurricular activities, as if he hadn't been tired enough in his previous life. The teacher started yelling at him loudly again and asked if he even knew how much effort students from lowly families like his had to put in to study at their academy. She was indignant, saying that he had such an opportunity, but he did not appreciate it at all and was wasting all the director's efforts. Edwin didn't react to this in any way. He just yawned and thought that he was being pestered again for completely incomprehensible reasons. After the teacher fell silent, he turned to Teacher Keeler and said that she was wrong. The guy smiled and said that he got into Billet thanks to talent and hard work, and if she didn't believe him, she could ask the director directly. Edwin also said that when he begged him to study in this place, nothing was mentioned about the suffering he would have to endure. The teacher got even angrier. She didn't understand how one could be so arrogant, and said that such behavior would sooner or later come back to haunt him. After that, she said that because of his behavior, he would be responsible for the inspection the next day, so he shouldn't relax. As she headed to her workplace, she asked him if he understood everything. But the guy sighed heavily and said that he understood everything and would do it. At that moment, he wondered if there would be any beauties among the newcomers that year, or just snot-nosed idiots again. He was going to go to the port a little later and look at these newcomers so that he would have an idea of what to expect. By that time, Melissa had already arrived at Port Nathan and was talking to the blonde guy who was there. She, hearing his words, asked in surprise whether the man who lent her the boat was really his uncle. The guy with one eye said that this was indeed true and suggested that they simply tie her up near the shore and the uncle would go and find her himself. After that, smiling, he asked if she had also come to take part in the exam that was to take place the next day. Melissa smiled and said that was correct, because she would be one of the candidates. Then she pointed back and said that these three would be accompanying her and that they were her younger brothers. Bass, who was standing behind, thought that she was not wasting her time. After all, as soon as she set foot on the island, she had already found herself a guide. He assumed that she was given the boat only because of her pretty eyes and because she asked very politely. The guy thought that it would be better for her to laugh until she could still do so, because very soon he would start taking revenge on her. He was going to find out the necessary information before paying Melissa back and then proceed with his plan. But Melissa had already turned to him by that time, and seeing that he was not reacting in any way, asked if he had even heard what she was saying. When the guy said that he was thinking, she replied that Mr. Ford said that they could spend the night at his place that day, since he lived just near Billet Academy, and it would be easier for them to get there. Bass, smiling, said that he thought that's what she said, but he himself was very surprised that she called him by name, although he was a complete stranger. He thought that Melissa was really a flirt, and this guy didn't seem all that honest at all. He was very suspicious. However, in any case, he believed that the girl knew very well what to do with him, and he believed that this evening she would gnaw him to the last bone. Of course, none of her assistants objected, and that same evening they were at Ford's house. The guy poured them a glass of beer and said that he made the drink himself, but he didn't know if they would like it. Melissa was very worried at this moment. She didn't know what to do, because if she drank, she would get drunk immediately, even from one sip. Seth and his friend immediately raised their glass and said that his dear sister just loved to drink, so he had definitely satisfied her wishes. When the girl heard this, she was very indignant and thought that they were not helping her at all. But then she explained to Ford that she had an exam the next day, so she would refuse to drink. Of course, even though she only got drunk once, she doesn't want to get into awkward situations with other people anymore. Bass, when he heard her refusal, immediately guessed that if she drank, she would stop pretending and show her true face, and he would be able to talk her into it and find out the necessary information. So, without thinking twice, he turned to the girl and said that he had never drunk with her before, so he asked if maybe she would agree to share a glass with him. He looked at her with a very pitiful look, and with hope in his voice asked if she was sure she would not agree to this. He thought it was very funny, because before she often used alcohol in lovemaking to make him submit, and now suddenly she was so untouchable. He thought that he was a genius after all, because in this life he was using her dirty tricks against her. The guy considered himself a genius. Melissa, when she looked into his beautiful and sweet eyes, thought that she certainly could not refuse him. So, smiling, she said that she would drink, but only 1 cup. After that, the girl drank a whole glass of this beer in 1 gulp and didn't even stop. When Ford saw this, he immediately smiled and, clapping his hands, told Miss Melissa that she really knew how to drink properly. He thought that this girl was not so simple with 3 men in her company hovering around her. She looked strange, and he even suggested that perhaps she was an experienced seductress herself. But Ford thought that if this was really the case, then it would not be difficult for him to get her, so he was going to try his chance. When the girl finished drinking, she raised the glass up and laughed loudly, telling everyone to look because she drank it all to the bottom in 1 gulp. After some time, Ford turned to her and asked if everything was okay with her because she had turned very red. He reached out his hand to her, but Melissa, because she was already very red, put his hand on her cheek and told Mr. Ford that he was very handsome. The guy immediately started smiling, thinking that his victim was already on the hook, and said that she was very drunk. Melissa at that moment thought that no man could resist her appearance, and assumed that she had a chance for an interesting evening. So, turning to Mr. Ford, she asked if he would mind if they hugged. The man immediately extended his arms and said that he wouldn't mind. However, Bass, who was standing behind her, grabbed her by the waist and pulled her closer to him, telling her not to do that. After that, he looked angrily at Mr. Ford and asked him to prepare a bedroom for them, because his sister had drunk a little too much and he would take her there so that she could rest. The man immediately smiled and asked if he really wanted 1 bedroom, but Bass answered in a rough voice that they always slept together. It was their tradition, so they only needed 1 bedroom. Some time passed from that moment, and the owner of the house took them to the 2nd floor, opening the door. He said that this was the largest room he had. Also, smiling, the man said that they could stop at this place. Bass was accompanying Melissa at that moment and tried to make sure that she did not fall down on the spot because she was already very drunk. Before leaving, Ford asked if they were really brother and sister because he needed to make sure. He was thinking that there wasn't a single beautiful girl in that horrible bellied academy and that he finally had a chance to start a romance, when suddenly this boss showed up, acting very suspiciously. The guy laid Melissa on the bed, who was already in a very sleepy state, and looked at him asking, "Do they really have to report to him?" But Ford, waving his hand, said that so be it. It was better to forget about it, and he himself believed that everything in this situation was definitely not so simple, and one girl with 3 men was a very big rarity. Soon Ford walked out the door, closing it behind him. Then Melissa raised her hand up and said that she was very hot. Bass immediately turned towards her and asked if she was really okay. He saw that she had already completely perked up. But the girl, stretching, said that the clothes were very tight, so she asked the guy to help her take them off. When Bass heard this request, he was very surprised. He even blushed. Then he stopped the girl who was about to undress and said that under no circumstances should she do this. Then Melissa looked him straight in the eye and just said his name. The guy was still in a very awkward position, but said that he was nearby. He was very curious about what she was going to do when they were finally alone. In all the time they spent together, Melissa had never laid a finger on him, so he found this very suspicious. But then the girl suddenly giggled and said that she could finally touch him, and also added that she had always considered him very handsome. And at that moment she herself thought that she was incredibly sorry that the author made him a secondary character, and he died so early. Bass put her hands on his face and asked with a smile if she had kidnapped him just because she liked his appearance. In fact, in her past life, Melissa quickly got tired of other men, but she was literally obsessed with them. Of course, the guy didn't understand the reasons for all this before, but now she says that it's all about appearance. But then the girl suddenly giggled and said that this was not true at all, because she did not want to kidnap him, and she herself thought that it was all a character from the novel, and not her at all. Bass suddenly became very angry, and grabbing her hand tightly asked who ordered her to do this then. The man was desperate and did not understand who could control such a crazy woman like Melissa, and he found it difficult to believe that someone else was behind his kidnapping. But the girl, ignoring his question, stretched and lay back on the bed. She yawned and said that she really wanted to sleep, and her eyes were just sticking together. The guy tried to wake her up by telling her to tell him straight out who ordered her to kidnap him. But Melissa pushed him away and said that she wanted to sleep, so she asked him to be quiet. After that, she took the second pillow that was lying nearby, hugged it, and immediately fell asleep. Bass watched this in surprise and could not believe that she really got so drunk from one glass that she could not even control herself. The guy was confused. He didn't understand what was going on and why Melissa in this life was so different from her past self. He stood next to her bed and thought that now he understood. The past, Melissa had kidnapped him not only because of her dirty desires. Well, then he had another important question that he had to figure out. Who was behind all this? While Melissa was sleeping, she began to scream loudly in her sleep and asked that they not be killed, but that someone help them. The guy, hearing this, was a little surprised. He covered her with a blanket and did not think that she could also have nightmares. But Bass came to the conclusion that he could still allow her to live until he found the leader of this whole conspiracy. When the next morning came, they were on NATO Island and were about to leave for the academy. As Bass passed by the people, he heard the guys talking and was very surprised that descendants of nobles from all over the world had gathered in this place. He was surprised that only the Ticket Academy was able to bring together people who were often in political confrontation. Seth, who was walking behind the girl, asked in surprise, "Are all these people really in that place just for the chance to get in?" And Seren started to get a little worried and thought that the level of competition was too high, so he already doubted that Melissa could get there. Seth was an optimist, so he smiled and said that the hostess shouldn't have any problems at all, and in this way he tried to cheer the girl up. But at that moment, Ford came up to them and, seeing Melissa, said that he was very glad to meet her. After that, he handed her a paper and said that he had registered her, and also explained that this was her ID. Melissa immediately thanked him for this, and also apologized for the inconvenience. But the girl was very surprised that local residents were registered without a queue, and this really helped her. Ford, smiling, said that she should not worry, because he would be undergoing the tests with them. Bass himself, who was standing nearby, could not understand what this sticky thing was doing in that place. Soon the boy, along with other students, went into the dark forest and said that by going through it, they would be able to get to Ticket Academy. Then suddenly Melissa heard a guy talking behind her. He said that the academy uses these thickets to screen candidates. Those who pass through the forest will also pass the preliminary selection. When she heard this, she immediately became wary because it sounded really quite suspicious. Bass, seeing her worried expression, immediately smiled and told her not to worry, because there were many of them, and they could overcome all difficulties together. He himself at that moment thought about the fact that she was trying so hard to get into this place, and suggested that perhaps it was because someone from Ticket Academy was behind her. He thought that he would most likely have to help her get into college to get closer to the truth. But then Ford suddenly came up to her, and taking her hands, told Melissa not to worry, because he would be able to protect her if anything happened. The guy himself was very proud of himself at that moment, and thought that if he needed to conquer a beauty, then demonstrating his strength at the right moment was an excellent move on his part. Bass tried to contain his anger, and thought about how once they entered the forest, he would need to find a way to get rid of this terrible guy. Melissa thanked him at that moment and, smiling, thought that Mr. Ford was incredibly kind to her. In fact, the main character of this story is a girl named Lena. Upon learning of the attack on her fiancé, she immediately led her troops to the rescue. On the way, her fleet got caught in a strong storm, and they were washed up on Nathan Island. The main character saved her, and they fell in love at first sight. The girl knew that there was still time before those events, and if she seized the initiative and stood in the way of the main character Bass, sending him to save the girl, she would be able to prevent the main characters from falling in love with each other and change the plot, thereby surviving. Then suddenly Bass noticed that Melissa was looking at him somehow strangely. It was more like he was prey, so he became wary, not understanding what she was planning again. But at that moment, they suddenly heard some arguing nearby. The guy grabbed the girl by the hand and told her not to be so ungrateful. He shouted very loudly at the poor girl and said that his proposal to unite was a great chance for her. The guy also said that if she was obedient and became his, he would guarantee that she would definitely pass this exam and enter the academy. When Edwin saw this, he sighed heavily and could not believe that this was happening again. Every year, when they enter, there are several of these bugs who are trying to find benefits for themselves. He extended his hand to Miss Melissa and said that they had better go, and he thought that one way or another the administration would take action. He didn't need to interfere, because he liked flirting with girls much more. But the guy at that moment began to cross all boundaries. He grabbed the poor girl by the face and asked if she was silent. It really meant that she agreed. This girl was Lena. She was 18 years old, the main character and princess of the Solonian Empire. She looked at the guy with great disgust and told him to take his hands off if he didn't want to die. Melissa became very concerned about this quarrel and turned to Ford, asking what was going on. The guy smiled and replied that every year nobles from all over the world come to this place, and quarrels are inevitable, so everything is fine, and she should not worry. Bass intervened in their conversation and said that he thought the lady was in trouble and could not believe that a gentleman like Mr. Ford would just stand by and watch it with folded arms. He thought that this would be the perfect excuse for him to get rid of Ford. After all, if he was gone, he would stop pestering Melissa. Melissa immediately turned to Lena and asked if everything was okay with her. In fact, she knew that there were few female officers at the Violet Academy, and since women were physically weaker than men, it was harder for them to pass the various assessments. But at that moment, Melissa saw a very unusual scene, and was surprised when Lena was able to stand up for herself. Lena grabbed the guy who was pestering her and threw him to the ground, saying that she had warned him not to make her angry. She stepped on his chest with her shoe. He immediately started screaming and almost burst into tears, saying that it hurt him a lot and asked her not to do that. And Melissa, looking more closely, saw that it was Lena Disalania. She could not understand what the main character of this story was doing in that place at that time. Lena soon let go of this hooligan and told him in a rude voice to leave while he still could. This guy immediately started to crawl back and said in a quiet voice that she would regret this. But the girl, shaking her hands with disgust, looked at the guy again and said that he was a coward who could only bully those who were weaker. So she certainly had nothing to be afraid of. At that moment, Elsa Harry, her maid, ran up to her, turned to Her Highness, and was very happy that she was finally able to find her. Lena looked at her maid in surprise and immediately asked what she was doing there at all. The maid immediately said that His Majesty the Emperor was furious when he learned that she had escaped from the crown. Elsa ran up to her and, hugging her leg, said that she was asking her to return it with her and get married, because everything could end even worse. She thought that otherwise she would have to lose her life, because the king would not leave everything like this. But Lena, smiling, said that there was no need to worry, because even if she had not run away, this marriage would not have taken place anyway. When the maid heard this, she was very surprised and asked why this was so. The girl, smiling, said that it was because her fiancé was destined to die. In fact, the girl could not believe until then that she was a fictional heroine of some novel. She couldn't believe that she had launched an entire rescue operation to free her fiancé from the hands of the evil witch. But in the end, Lena was unable to save him. And because of this, the truce between the empires ended and the war broke out again. The lives of millions of people were simply destroyed. And in the process of searching for the culprit of all this, the depraved witch Melissa, she fell in love with another hero, Edwin Foster. But when the girl woke up, this whole life, full of ups and downs, turned out to be just a fiction, an ordinary dream. Her personality, age, fate, love, all this is just someone's invention of a person with a very vivid imagination. That's why Lena didn't want that fate anymore. She ran away from that marriage and was going to live a completely different life, which would be different from the previous one. Only in this way could she change the life path destined for her, which was invented by some author. In fact, Ticket Military Academy was not the main setting of the story, so Lena believed that she would have more control over her life there than anywhere else. She also thought that the main character was also in this academy. She didn't know how many other people in the pictures had awakened their consciousness like hers, but Lena believed that if she could no longer rely on her old allies, she urgently needed to look for new ones. Melissa, watching this whole situation, was very scared. Events were changing and developing too quickly, and she did not know how to control it all. Suddenly, Bass came up to her, and putting his hand on her shoulder, asked if everything was okay with her. When the girl said that everything was fine, he replied that no one else needed their help, and suggested that they move on. Melissa agreed and thought that, fortunately, Bass had never seen the main character in the story, and she had not had time to hate her. And besides, Lena didn't even know who she was, so she hoped that everything would go well and calmly. The girl finally breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that everything was under control, and for a while she could stop worrying.